Okay, our last session. And I have to say that this I had a bit of consternation because a lady called me, she's probably here, probably about 6-8 weeks ago, and said, is Merlin Goldberg speaking? And I had to think, Merlin Goldberg? Who the fuck is Merlin Goldberg? And then, of course, I remembered this one of Thomas's anecdotes from last year, and it fell into place. So maybe he'll remind us who Merlin Goldberg is. But I first came across Thomas. I saw, I think, a YouTube video, and I invited Thomas to participate in an event that we did with John Perkins, or Confessions of an Economic Hitman. We did a series of events in 2012 called Financial Terrorism with John Perkins, which we took to Dublin, Manchester, and London. And Thomas participated in that event. And this is his your third AV event, AV 5, 6, and 7. Yeah? What are you doing next year? Oh, we'll worry about that later. So Thomas is a very controversial figure online. And I love it when people, say, well, Thomas Sheridan, God, I don't agree with him on this. And I say, Thomas is winding you up. Yeah? And if you engage with Thomas on Facebook after about 10 o'clock at night, when he's about three quarters of the way through a bottle of Bushmills, then, good luck. Because I wouldn't want to take Thomas on an online debate sober, let alone when he's had the benefit of the Bushmills. So Thomas has made a name for himself over the last 5 years with the work that he's done on exposing psychopaths, with exposing gaslighting. And I can't believe you only bought 4 books with you. Is that right?
I'm on that's all I did. Sorry. I'm not very well organised.
I'm sure Thomas will tell you where you can get hold of his books, but he's certainly made a very significant impact. He's helped a lot of people understand what perhaps needs to be changed in their lives in terms of their association with people, perhaps in their domestic life or in their work life. And Thomas always makes fantastic contribution to AV events, so no pressure, mate. I'm sure tonight's no different. So please, ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Goldberg, Merlin Goldberg.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I can't believe the turnout is fantastic. All the speakers, brilliant. It's very important for me to come to these things because I live the rest of the year in a bubble. World War III could start and I wouldn't know about it. I'll be too busy telling jokes online. So I actually get news when I come to these things. And that's not always a bad thing either, because it's good to kind of keep focused on things that I'm passionate about, like art and things like that, comedy. Now, do you remember when we did the very first Middleton Arena gig? You brought me up. It was the first one to bring me over from Ireland. And there was a guy in the front row started heckling me. Remember that? And the first question he asked, I was a few sentences into my presentation, very nervous. The Middleton Arena is like a stadium kind of thing, and I was a nobody at the time. Now I'm less obscure, but I was very nervous. And there was a guy down the front, and he interrupted me after a couple of slides. And my first thing was, I said, I'll answer the questions when it's over. Just let me finish. I was nice. Let me finish. Very, very reasonable. And then a few minutes later, he puts his hand up again, and he stands up this time, and he says, "Well, I disagree with that." I said, "You can disagree with me all you like after I've given the presentation. These people have paid in to hear me and not you." And I said it politely, And then he got up a third time, and I called him a dickhead. Do you remember that? And the place nearly went into a riot, but they actually threw him out. I found out later on that he was sent in by Occupy. He was sent in to shut me up because their idea of protest is holding a mindless sign that says "Stop climate change." You understand? And when anyone with a bit of oomph comes along, especially at that time, and a big mouth like me, it wasn't good for them. And I learned a very valuable lesson then. I said, my attitude from that point was on, I don't care. I don't care who I offend, because chances are the ones that I'm offending are the ones that are trying to shut me down on behalf of someone else. And that's cool, and I don't mind people to disagree with me or anything like that. I can I can bollock someone out of it and still be friends on a topic. Now, I hadn't got a clue what I was going to do a month ago before this presentation. And like all the AVs, magic happens. Something amazing always seems to happen. And that's the story of my life. Now, I'm just the kind of person that I've never had a normal life. I've never woken up. I've never had that. I've been cynical from the time I was in the pram. I literally was. Now, I was just thinking then about, earlier on coming here, I was remembering the very first time I ever addressed an audience. I was 14 years old in secondary school, and I'd won an art competition for an anti-drugs poster. And the anti-drugs poster, I grew up in a very tough neighbourhood, Ballymun, on the north side of Dublin, the notorious ghetto at the time, and riddled with heroin problems. And the poster I did was a drug dealer holding a big syringe like it was a machine gun. An Irishman with a machine gun, that's not no stereotype there. And he was shooting at kids who were running away. And the thing was, the headline was, "Don't get smacked." And so I got the first prize, which was 40 punts, when we still had, that was a lot of money back then, when we still had our own money in Ireland. And they brought me up on the stage, and they had the Garda anti-drugs enforcer, and they had the headmaster, and they had a few other people, and they were there. "Aren't you a great lad? Aren't you a great kid? Look, this is the future. This is how we'll beat the problem." And when I got the money, me and my friends went out and bought LSD. And serious, that's true. That's true. That's absolutely true. Because there used to be a rock and roll magazine called Cream. I don't know if anyone remembers it back then. And it had an interview with, it had an article about Syd Barrett. We were all getting into Pink Floyd. And we had to try this. We actually bought LSD. And I've never had a spiritual experience on LSD, but I had very good, creative and interesting experiences, including when I knew it was time to stop. I went up to an ambulance that was parked on the street, and I knocked on the side window, and when the paramedic opened it, I ordered a vanilla cone. That's when you stop. Now, this is serious. Does anybody know what that flag is, what country that is?
Texas.
That's actually interesting, you said that. It's Chile. Chile is a country that I've become very interested in recent times, through little happenstances. Now, let me tell you something that happened recently that gave me this presentation. I'm currently writing a book on what happened to the Druids. The Druids in Ireland, the Druids in Britain were wiped out at AD 60 by the Romans in Anglesey by Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman general. Wiped out. Your whole Druidic culture was taken down in one go. In Ireland, we were never invaded by the Romans, and we had the Druids there as a force until just before the arrival of Christianity. And what they did was they were very clever. They knew they were never going to defeat Rome as a Christian nation. So they started building an Irish version of Christianity. That doesn't mean they had beer in the font. They were building an Irish version of Christianity using pagan deities and incorporating them as saints. So by the time St. Patrick arrived, there's some amazing stories like St. Kieran. He was actually a Druid who went and built Clonmacnoise, which became the centre of Irish Christianity. And it was built by Druids. And when St. Patrick arrived, he found the country that was already becoming Christian, but all the saints were all previously Druidic or pagan or heathen, like St. Bridget was Breege, and so on. And it was all set to go, and he was very suspicious. And that's why he set up his own secondary Vatican Catholic Church at Navan Fort in Armagh, and he refused to. For a long time, there was a battle in the Irish Church between what they called the Celtic Church, the early Irish Druidic Church, where Druids had completely infiltrated, and they knew the reason why they did this was that they wouldn't be destroyed the same way the British Druids were. They weren't going to go down in a battle. They were going to become fifth columnists, and this is all very easily documented inside the Catholic Church. And what they managed to do was they managed to save Irish mythology and ancient history. And that's why an Irish person, you asked them, where do you come from, they can go to the Neolithic Art Gallery at Nowth in the Brine Valley and point to a 5,000-year-old stone artwork and say, my people did that. And we have the Druids to thank for that. And that's why in Britain you don't have that, because first you were wiped out by the Romans, and then second you were taken out by William the Conqueror with the harrying of the north, and then the Magna Carta and all that came in, and that's what happened then. We were lucky. And these Druids were very shrewd, very clever people. There were men and women too, by the way. And they became, after the Synod of Whitby, the two churches merged in Ireland, became part of and so parts of Scotland and the Isle of Man became part of the Vatican Empire. Now, the Druids continued to exist in Ireland as a force called the Fíle. And they were Druids in every way that they had previously been, but they were secular. They didn't get involved in religious or spiritual matters. They were counselors, advisors, they remembered genealogies, and they wrote down all the Irish mythology and history. That's why we know today, we know about the True of Danann and all these other groups because of them inside the Catholic Church as fifth columnists. And they would interject, they would say things like the first one to arrive came with Noah's boat, and then they'd give you the real mythology, just to keep the Vatican off their tail. Now, they were around until something called the Flight of the Earls, when the old Irish Gaelic kingdoms collapsed. There was a war. Ireland and Spain went to war against England because England became Protestant, and there was a kind of a sectarian war across the sea. The English won, and Ireland and the Spanish were destroyed, and that was made England an empire. That was made a great global power, and a Protestant nation. Now, part of the peace deal was that the Irish aristocracy would leave the country and go to the continent. And they did. And they took with them very strange things. They took with them some Fíle, Druids, and they took with them unknown objects and strange objects. I don't know what that means, that's all it says, right? They went to Europe and they founded colleges all over Europe, including in England as well. So they vanished out of history. And then suddenly, not long after that, this thing called Freemasonry arrives. And my speculation is that I can't get this working. That the Druids probably started European Freemasonry. Can someone help me change the slide here? Started European Freemasonry, and brought these kinds of ideas into what what would eventually become the Enlightenment. Now, that's the one I want. That one. Okay, that's the one I want. Yeah. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah. Thank you.
Forward, back.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Freemasonry has a really bad name. Today, it's associated with things like criminality, cronyism, business deals, all this kind of thing. But it didn't start out that way. Freemasonry started out as something quite beautiful, and that's why it attracted people like Isaac Newton, William Stuckley, and Mozart. In the wake of all the sectarian wars between Catholics and Protestants in Europe, Freemasonry was seen as a way of rebuilding Europe without sectarian divides. This is what these men wanted. They didn't want anything else. They just wanted to heal Europe of sectarian divide through science, through the arts, through philosophy, through natural philosophy. And that's what they were after. And it did work, especially in Ireland after the Catholic Confederacy Wars, which wiped out 1/3 of the population. Freemasonry actually helped form the first Irish government, which was in Grattan's Parliament, which was very successful until the Act of Union. Freemasonry started to develop in Europe intellectuals, artists, philosophers, and a kind of a mini renaissance happened at the academic level. Now, there was a banking group in Frankfurt, and I'm sure you've heard of it, and they formed this kind of fake group called the Bavarian Illuminati. And they got this guy called Adam Weishaupt to basically form a means of infiltrating Freemasonic lodges, because the banks realized that this was a fantastic espionage network, trading network, a way of moving deals between countries, because there was lodges established in every major European and many American cities by this time of the most influential, wealthy people. If you get in there, you have a fantastic network. You have a fantastic network to build the earliest stages of globalism. And this is why they had the Dutch East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company. They were all very interested in Freemasonry. The Bavarian Illuminati, who are not, they were a real group, but they're not the real Illuminati. That was just a name they gave themselves. And they got into the Grand Orient Lodge in Paris, and they changed them into a political organization. And I have books at home, and by the time they figured this out, they had realized it was too late. They started to become aware of things like republicanism. Republicanism was invented in places like the Grand Orient Lodge. That's where all the tricolors, French, Irish, Italian, so on, were all Mexican, were all developed, and all the other flag systems. Now, this is how we got to be the world we are today. All the Freemasons were taken over by Frankfurt and Prussian nobility. Now, this Freemasonry thing, I didn't know an awful lot about. I used to hear all kinds of things like they would do ritual sacrifice and stuff like that. They would do all these kind of stereotypes. And amazingly, a magical event happened about a month ago. I collect very old books, and one of the reasons I collect old books is because they're the only ones, they have things in that have been taken out. Now, you people go online and you would look at, I got a PDF of some book from 1850. No, that's not the real book. You've been allowed that. You've been allowed that book. Now, why the books were changed was this is not the first awakening in history, the first awakening people. This happened also in the mid-late Victorian era, when people started to become literate. They started to be able to read. The working classes were able to pick up books and read. And all the books that were out there at that time were written by the so-called elites for themselves, and never thinking that the masses would ever learn how to become literate and read these books. And these books would be talking about the aristocracy and the royal families as if they were gods. That's how they would see themselves. And the rest of us are scum. This is how they spoke. This is why David Cameron burns a £50 note in front of a homeless person. This is the culture but that was how they all were. I don't know if I did this last year, but in Prussia, you could legally murder a peasant if you were a landlord. And you were more likely to be killed by an officer in the Prussian army than you were by the enemy. It was totally okay to kill a poor person. And so that was the first kind of enlightenment, because then the anarchist movement and all these other things like communism, the early days of that kind of pulled out of that. They were like, look what these motherfuckers think about us. Look what they think about us. And so, have you ever heard of the Carnegie Library System? This great altruistic thing, the Carnegie Family Foundation built these magnificent libraries all over the world to do their good works and educate the masses. Well, that had two purposes. It was a gigantic book burning and book hiding operation, because they didn't want the masses getting their hands on the real meat that's in the stately homes and so on. And also, your library card was a database. What's your age? What do you do? How old do you live? It was the first Facebook. And what books are you renting? Why is she renting books on anarchism? Why is he reading books on communism? Let's keep an eye on him. Who does he know? Is you right, your woman over there? They're a member of a sports club, and both of them have been renting books on revolutionary things. And that was the first Facebook. That's really, the Carnegie Library System was the first Facebook. Data profiling, very, very early on. And they tended to build libraries in very attractive buildings, so you'd want to go in them. A poor person living in a slum inner city housing would go to this beautiful centrally heated library. And the Carnegies would tell the world, we're teaching the poor, we're teaching people about all these things. Now, a friend of mine's an antique dealer in the retail park where I work. I have a regular matrix job. And he told me about, he knows I collect all books on the occult and books on magic and stuff like that. And he said to me, there's a place down, I can't tell you where it was because it was kind of dangerous, tricky for me. Sensitive, shall we say. And he says, the old guy there, his daughter has come back from Canada, she's getting on, and she's decided to sell the family home context. And he said, man, there's tons of old books. Go down and have a look. I went down, and he did have a load of old books, but there was all Freemasonic paraphernalia around the place as well. And I said, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. And then I looked through, and there wasn't really anything that interested me except a stack of Freemasonic books from the 1920s. beautifully illustrated. And I'm going to grab these because you'll never get these anywhere. So this is why you don't get them in Oxfam and other shops. This is why not in libraries. As soon as they're told to burn these books or pass them on or get rid of them, they're sacred text almost. And so I got these books I got 5 of them, big ones about that height, for €200. I put on a Geordie accent and went out the wrong way, because I knew I had dynamite in my hand the minute I picked these things up. And I've been leaking them out on my Facebook page. I've shown them to some people, what I found, what's in them already. And now I came out recently. Not that way, I came out. If I was in Bohemian Grove, I'd be the one behind the statue screaming, while Arnold Schwarzenegger's rogering me. That's what I'd be, I wouldn't have. But, control yourself, Thomas. I have to keep my mind focused. Yes, I got the books home, and I've been leaking them online to people and blowing their minds, right? And I have dynamite. I have absolute dynamite. It's the control system in 2 volumes through a Freemasonic text belonging to a 33rd degree Mason. It talks about everything from how to get people to basically gaslighting them. And it gives examples of gaslighting. You know that famous horse in England, the White Horse of Uffington? It's not a horse, it's a cat. You only think it's a horse because it's called the White Horse. You only think that because it's in your head. And he gives an example of that's how you can change people's minds. You tell them something is something, but if you look at that picture in its totality and look at the negative spaces by the grass, it's a cat. White horse goes into your brain, and it's in there. These people knew psychology years and years ago. They knew that, and they do use it. Let me tell you something. Magic and the occult is real, but it's not what you think it is. It's not what you think magic is. All magic is the taking of something in the subconscious or the conscious mind and bringing it into reality. So if you're a songwriter and you're walking along one day and you're humming a tune, that's pretty good. You go home, put some lyrics on it, play the guitar, and you've written a song and record it. That's closing the ritual. You have created magic. That's all it is. That's all magic is. Black magic is when you do that to another person against their will. So a used car salesman who knows that the engine is falling apart sells a car to someone, talking and playing games with them, doing the lingo. That's black magic, because he's been spellbound. He's been spellbound. And things like, stage magic, I think, I don't know who it was earlier on that said this. It might have been Max last night, where they cannot, or it might have been Ian, they said they cannot, and this is in this book, they cannot force us to do anything. We have to give our permission. This is something you've really got to bring into your lives. Yes, this crap is coming down the road that like Max and everyone else is talking about. But remember, for it to work, we have to accept, can I have a volunteer from the audience? Now, when you have a stage magician, you'll have the sexy girl, half naked, right? Half naked sexy girl. He's here like this. He walks in, he looks at the audience, and he knows 90% of people are thick in the planet. And he goes, can I have a volunteer from the audience? Some guy wants to get close to the sexy girl. So he's thinking with his yin-yang, and he's already suggestible, okay? He's on the stage, right, next to the girl, and she gives him a kiss when he gets on. He's been bewitched, okay? This is really serious now. And he puts him under hypnosis, and then he might have him laughing like a dog, barking like a dog. And the audience are all falling around, pissing themselves, laughing at this guy. And then after he's humiliated him in front of everyone, he goes, 1, 2, 3, come out of the trance. He comes out of the trance, and the girl gives him another kiss. Give Johnny a round of applause, and he gets off the stage thinking he's a great guy. He doesn't know that he's been humiliated. Now, no crime or no violation of will was incurred because he gave his permission. He didn't say, get up on the stage, gobshite. He said to him, can I have a volunteer from the audience? Now, I want you to really absorb this into your minds, this idea. because this is unbelievably empowering. Yes, the worst will come, but you don't have to accept it. Now, for instance, I looked up that thing about the mandatory vaccinations that Graham was talking about in Australia. Yes, it's coming. Yes, it's a bill, but it's not there yet. So, but people will run out and get their kids vaccinated thinking I won't be able to get to school, I get my benefits. In Ireland 10 years ago, they banned the 100-watt incandescent light bulb. You can go to any shop in Ireland today and buy a 100-watt incandescent light bulb. They just spoke about it. They had the Minister for Environmental Buffoonery, and he will go, oh, we're going to ban the 100-watt light bulb. It's dangerous. It's causing global warming. The next day, all the Muppets run out, and they unscrew the real light bulb, the incandescent light bulb, and they screw in the fluorescent one that has all that shite in it, right? Right? Was any law passed? No. The ones who didn't do it, didn't obey, they didn't come, going to have a volunteer from the audience. Now remember these things. This is magic. This is a magical awareness. I'm giving you a very beautiful things here. When you go to a rock concert these days, I went to see the Stranglers recently, right? At this, and 99% of the audience were the Muppets, as I call them, were watching the band through their mobiles or through their iPads. Right? Isn't that how it is today, right? Because that's more real to them. That's more real to them than the band on the stage. The ones who were not holding them up, that's our people. That's our people. Now, when people say there's going to be a global awakening, I don't think so. And frankly, looking at what's out there, I don't want to be either. Because I don't want them near me. But there's just enough to make a good life for the rest of us. Yeah. Right? So there's none of this stuff of like, we have to do it. We don't have to do anything, okay? And if you look at so many things through history, people were warned. And they didn't run, or they didn't go, because this is literally how they think. And how they think is, I was reading through the book, and when you hear this stuff, they have a belief in a kind of a solar-lunar duality. And it's all about creating solar-lunar dualities. The color red, it looks like orange there, but believe me, it's red. The color red represents the solar aspect, and this doesn't just mean it's the sun, it means one side of a dualistic idea. And the white or blue is always the moon. And the flux between the two creates the charge that spellbound society, right? Now, you have, and it says this in the book, and it says it, but not in a kind of sinister way. It talks about how wonderful it is. Association football, as they called it back then. You have one team that's blue in the city, and one that's either blue or white, or one that's red. And you'll have the solar part of the city creating a charge in flux with the lunar part of the city. Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Arsenal. It just goes on. Bristol Rovers, Bristol City. Liverpool, Everton, a classic, right? It goes on. And this is the charge. And this was also said, and the books talk about how it's a wonderful thing because it stops revolution, and it gives the poor a life, and it gives them an existence, and it gives them a wonderful sport to enjoy. And association football was completely founded by Freemasons, and they picked the blues and the red for the major team, or white. So that's where like you'd have the white teams come in. But the idea was that they wanted life stable, a stability. The Freemasons wanted stability to make people happy, poor people happy. The ones who infiltrated Freemasonry wanted stability so they could control us. Pathological, right? So that's why it changed, and they kind of like use this flowery language. It's sometimes hard to read the book because there's a lot of definitions I'm still working on. But the idea where this actually is originally rooted in was, believe it or not, fox hunting. And it came out of that, and they wear the red, and the fox is the blue or the white. And you've often heard me, as someone's seen my others talk, I always talk about the horror of actually seeing a fox being killed one day at a hunt meeting, and what it was like. And that's why they have blooding and stuff. Now, they're the solar aspect the aristocrats on the horses, the tops, right? The fox is the lunar aspect, right? And when it's the chase and the hunt, the fox sometimes gets away. The fox most times gets killed. But the expression once in a blue moon in this book is when they would deliberately let the fox live to create an element of chance in society. So people would think, and that's the term once in a blue moon, a pop star, they have a Susan Boyle. Look at her. Anyone can she can be famous. She's a Glasgow housewife. She's a pop star up there with Madonna. Once in a blue moon. And today, I walked out today, and we have once in a blue moon in the sky today. And is their solar aspect. When the moon is visible in the blue sky, once in a blue moon, remember that? The fox is allowed to triumph. And you think you live in a world of... You think you live... And look all through history. They're the Susan Boyle of football, am I right? Am I right? Blue and white of English football, right? So it's this template that they've created, that original Freemasons created to create stability and harmony in society still exists. Unfortunately, Freemasonry was corrupted about 200 years ago, and it's a pathological system of control. And they're using magic to control us. So the idea is like, they're not going to put a chip in me, but they're not going to force a chip in you, right? They're going to have an ad on TV where they're going to have a sexy young people dancing, and they're watching music videos in their skull because they got a chip in their hand. And then all the suggestible types will run out and get that. No violation of will has occurred. They willingly came as a fool. That's actually the kind of language they use. They willingly came as a fool, right? Don't be a fool. It's really easy, okay? That's what happens. And they spellbind us with all these things, and when it gets predictable, they throw up once in a blue moon. The fox is allowed to live. Chile. Now, you see the colors of the flag. Red, white, and blue, very common in all Union flag, American flag, Puerto Rican flag. This is very common. Solar aspect, lunar aspect, and the star is Venus. They have a very strong connection to Venus because of Lucifer. Now, Lucifer is not what you think Lucifer is. Lucifer is not the devil. Lucifer is a fallen angel. And this is why in Saul Alinsky's book, he dedicates his book, Ruled for Radicals, to Lucifer, because Lucifer was the one who challenged the bully God. So the idea was that Lucifer is a necessary force in reality because he lights a fire on their ass every so often. And he shines purity. And this is how they see it. Remember, they're not Christians. They use Christian archetypes for a different reason. You know, they use archetypes, but they use it for a different reason. Now, Chile is an interesting country, and it's an interesting country because it caught my attention when I was researching for my other upcoming book, Walpurgis Night Volume 2. Walpurgis Night Volume 1 was about the Nazi occult and how that rose up in Germany out of Völkisch and other Nazi occult societies, magical groups. The second part will be during the war and after the war. So when Walpurgis Night came out, I have StatCounter on my website, and I had any interview I had for that, I was bombarded by hits from Chile and Argentina and Peru. You know what happened there after the war. Nazis all went there. I mean, the ones that went at Nuremberg, they were disposable civil servants for the most part. The real meat, I mean, Albert Speer should have been the first one to hang. He gets a few years in prison and then he's off. Werner von Braun should have been one of the first ones to hang. He'd worked tens of thousands of Italians and Polish slave workers in underground caves working on the V weapons. They were killed in tunneling accidents and stuff. He goes to NASA, golden boy of NASA. They sacrificed, it's just like what Willem was saying. They sacrificed the disposable ones, and the real monsters that are useful, they'll hang on to them. They'll hang on to them. And that's why what happened in the Balkans, you had these absolute monsters in the Croatian nationalists during the World War II. And these people were, these police forces in Croatia, did things that were far beyond even the SS. And yet, how many people know about them? No, no. But we've all been taught to believe that the Serbs are bastards. Why are the Serbs, considered that? Why did they get a hard time? Same reason the Irish have always got a hard time. Same reason the Samis in Scandinavia got a hard time. Indigenous Europeans. They don't want Europeans having a history that's older than 200 years. And that's why they know about genetic memories. They know about this stuff. They know how powerful it is. And this is why they're always trying to create new countries. Went down to South America, create a new, so the natives down there, the Peruvians and so on, new countries, new ideas, and it's always based on these Freemasonic ideas. Now, while researching for the book, I came across this extremely interesting and despicable fellow. His name was Paul Schaefer Schneider. He was an unashamed Nazi. He was a member of the Hitler Youth, and he founded a weird religion during the war, a kind of a Nazi Christianity type thing. After the war, he was done with child molestation charges, right? Now, what happened? He somehow ends up in Chile. He somehow ends up in Chile at the Colonia Dignadia cult. Now, this cult was unbelievable. It was basically a section of the country that was cordoned off. And this notorious pedophile was put in charge of it. When he should have been in prison, he was off as the leader of a religion in South America, where they would take Chileans and they would re-engineer them using Nazi MK Ultra type mind control techniques that were developed in Germany during the Second World War and prior to that. He was a medic, so he obviously had some kind of insight into psychology. And so they would bring Chileans down there. Often they would enter by their own accord, as some suffered from depression, some had problems, others were lost souls looking for religion. The usual kind of people that join cults, lost souls. They want, like the people that they wander into these things. And while he was in there, he became a god, and he was the master gaslighter. He had these people so brainwashed that if one of the people in the place died, he'd wheel the coffin into a room like this, and he would try and raise them. He would say, "I raise you from the dead. I raise you from the dead." And then someone in the audience stand up and it goes, "He lives. It's a miracle." And the guy was still dead in the fucking coffin. And then the audience would jump up and go, "Praise." That's the power of black magic and gaslighting. To take a false reality and make you believe it is real, okay? He was one of these guys. He was a notorious pedophile, as I said, possibly responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Chilean people. Now, here's where it gets really creepy. He did this with not only the full blessing of the Chilean government, but also the West German government. The post-war anti-Nazi West German government that were healing themselves from their past, the new good German government were taking care of this guy and looking after him in Chile. He had direct access in Santiago to the German embassy. He could walk in any time, ask them for anything they wanted, and he got it. This is supposed to be a guy that's worse than the fellows who hung at Nuremberg. Worse than them, okay? Again, he was a notorious pedophile, had sex and murdered young boys. Now, in the 70s, you had a revolution in Chile, and you had a democratically elected leader who was a socialist leader. The United States said, "No, we don't like this." Britain said, "No, we don't like this." And the CIA, under Henry Kissinger, implemented a military coup. And a guy called General Pinochet came into power. Pinochet worked exclusively with Schaefer Schneider to get people who had involved themselves in the revolution, young people, and put them in the Colonia Dignidad, which is the dignity colony, in the south of Chile, in the middle of nowhere. And they became like mind-controlled slaves, and they became... one of them was a German chap who was over there, got involved in the revolution, ended up in the colony, but he pretended he was disabled because they were giving him electroshock therapy, and he was a photographer, and he worked in the engineering shop in the cult compound, and he started taking photographs and implementing his escape. Eventually, he and some others did escape. He, as a German citizen, went to the German embassy and asked for diplomatic immunity after they escaped, and just took them ages to get out. When they got to the German embassy, the German ambassador said, "We will drive you to the airport." And when they got to the airport, he was waiting for them. Walked up to the German ambassador and shook his hand. They actually managed to run, escape, and jump onto a Lufthansa flight. Just by chance, the pilot knew what was going on because he heard what disgusting this place was and knew about this guy. And he closed the doors and flew off. And the Chileans couldn't shoot down the airliner going to Bonn because it would have been a diplomatic, it would have been a major diplomatic thing. They got away and they got the photographs out. Put it in the newspapers, showed the photographs of what was going on. Guess what happened this cult compound? It's still in business. It's still in business to this day. He died in 2012. He was arrested in Argentina. Argentinians have no love for the Chilean government, and one special reason. There's Margaret Thatcher, and there's General Pinochet. There's Margaret Thatcher. When I say it's dark, she defended this monster to his death. She defended this monster to her death. Jimmy Savile spent 11 Christmases in her home as a private family guest. This guy up here, she did everything to keep from going to any kind of war crimes trial, anything, Pinochet. The guy who was an overseer. Oh, by the way, Pinochet was involved in going down the camp and getting this guy, Schaefer Schneider, to buy weapons, and the weapons were tested out on innocent people in the camps. They said, "I don't want to shoot dogs anymore, it's not an accurate test." And they shot patients from the psychiatric hospital with weapons. She protected him. What was Jimmy Savile doing? Boardmore, Sutcliffe, and youth, and people, and you can't explain this to the average person, and you never will, because even all the years I've been looking into this, I've written 2 books on psychopaths, 1 book on Nazi occult, and 1 book on mind control, and I still can't believe the stuff that I find out. You couldn't make it up. Now, as it says, ultimately we're dealing with magic. This is magic. Black magic, white magic, just call it whatever you want. But it's all about the sleight of hand, the deception, and the control of perceptions within society. We're gaslighted constantly. Now, here's Jimmy. There's Jimmy. There. Did not feel great. Yeah. Anyone know who he is? Yorkshire Ripper serial killer. When he was at Boardmore Psychiatric Hospital, he used to be best friends with this serial killer. He killed so many in Yorkshire, we don't know how many he killed. We just don't know, right? Jimmy used to bring Sutcliffe takeaways and Chinese food and Indian food and sweets and chocolates, and used to go into his room, and they would hear howls of laughter coming in. And I'll tell you why. Jimmy Savile helped him kill someone, at least one. Jimmy Savile is responsible for at least one of the Yorkshire Ripper murders, a woman called Irene Richardson, which was found in the back of his apartment building with Jimmy Savile's teeth marks in her. And that's why he was asked to give dental imprints in rubber. Because David Yallop when we still had good journalists, when we actually had journalists, there was an amazing journalist called David Yallop. He wrote the famous book, In God's Name, about the propaganda due Freemasons in the Vatican Bank and the assassination of Roberto Calvi. He also was an embedded journalist within the Yorkshire Ripper, case at the time in the South and West Yorkshire Police. And in the book, Deliver Us from Evil, he says he didn't work alone. And what more, the reason why the Yorkshire Ripper case went on and on and on and on was because the police and somebody wanted it. They did not want whoever the second person was to be found. Jimmy Savile was not on top of the pops any night a murder happened. I've checked. Jimmy Savile was a personal friend of his. Jimmy Savile, back in the day, right before he died, had some weird moment, maybe kind of an Alzheimer's, where he told a policeman, when he's being investigated for a sexual crime, for something else that happened in Kent, I believe, he said, sure, I was friends with Sutcliffe. I was involved. I was up around him. I know more about that case than anyone knows, but I've got friends, this kind of thing. I've got friends. He's basically admitting he was involved in these killings. Now, Yallop, in his book about the case, has said that it was engineered chaos, as if they wanted this to go on. And what happened was, in Yorkshire cities, and some killings were happening. He killed some people in Manchester too, women. It became a way of testing behavior in society. So you had curfews. They used to do things like, if this was a working men's club in Bradford, and you were all having a good night out, they had this bogus Yorkshire Ripper tape. And the real voice, it's alleged with this guy called Wearside Pete. I don't believe it's him. I put it through my auto, I analyze it's someone else. I think it might be him. And they used to play it in the clubs. People go quiet. And there was the Yorkshire Ripper, the fake voice. This was trauma-based mind control across a whole section of Yorkshire. Then they flooded cities like Sheffield with feminists from London who would say, protect women from being slaughtered by men up here. Every man in Yorkshire was suddenly the killer. Women, say if a woman, a husband was home late, he could have been out with his friends having a drink on the sly, doing anything, came home late in a murder that happened at night, they'd be inundated with calls from women saying, I think my husband's the Ripper. They had everyone paranoid. It became this enormous behavioral control issue. And they wanted it. They wanted it because we are lab rats to them. We're lab rats. Now, this serial killer thing, I didn't mention it at the beginning, but this year I had a kind of a huge mainstream breakthrough. I made a documentary last year about a possible serial killer, short film called Blind Spot in Manchester, is killing gay guys. Film was a huge hit. It was a magical spell of my own, and I'll tell you why I did it that way. I was going through the papers and I saw through the internet, and there was a guy called Professor Craig Jackson, who was a criminal psychologist, I believe, or a behaviorist at Birmingham University, and he laid out the case that there's so many young gay men found dead in the canals in Manchester that they're not, or suspected gay men, they're not suicides. There's too many of them. It's nearly 100 at this point, and there's too many of them. And a canal is the worst place to commit suicide. Canal waters aren't that deep. And he said, you can't, and most of the verdicts, coroner verdicts, were either inconclusive or left open. And this included one young lad who called his mother screaming right before he was killed or found in the water. And the police were still saying, this is, and I immediately, that's how I learned about psychopaths. I used to read books on serial killers because there was nothing else out there. And immediately, when I started looking at the case, there's a serial killer in Manchester. Absolutely, this guy Craig Jackson is right. He was bollocked out of it by the police in Manchester and by the media. And I said, okay, I'm going to try and help this guy. And I went to Manchester at 5 a.m. and started going around the canals on a Saturday morning. Because I reckon if there was a serial killer in Manchester, it'd be Saturday morning around 5 a.m. There's something about 5 a.m. that's very strange. It's called the blue hour in Scandinavia. It's when you have, it's almost like an unreal experience. It's right before the birds start singing. It's almost like the cusp between day and night. It's the dark night of the soul in the actual time frame. A very powerful time. That's why magicians go out at that time and everything. And so I went around the canals and I made this film just on my mobile. Got home, and I made it in a very artsy style. I made it very, very artsy in a short 15-minute film. Immediately, people were fascinated by it. Immediately, it was controversial. I love being controversial because you know what that means? They're fucking paying attention. That's what that is. That's why I'm not. I'm a nice fella, but I'm Mr. In your face if I want important information to get out there because no one else is listening. I'm a bard. That's what I consider myself, a bard. And so the film was made, got out there, and I was contacted by a mainstream journalist. I can't give the name. And they said, "You're right. Bang on. There's something not right." And they gave me inside information on what's going on in Manchester. It was immediately starting to remind me of Yorkshire. There was something going on here with the Sutcliffe days. So what happened was then, I knew I was in a dangerous position because when the mainstream approach you, you don't know if you're being set up or not. So I was kind of canny and coy with these people, and fair enough to them, using another journalist, a different name, gave me a very, very positive write-up in the Manchester Evening News. The next day, I was in 2-page spread in the Central Daily Mirror, and I got 2 million hits on my website in 24 hours. So I had a huge mainstream bang just like that, covered all over the world, and that was brilliant. So it was like I got it out there, and suddenly everybody in Manchester was talking about my film because they got to hear something funny is going on, that the Professor Gray Jackson, because he's a professor, he can't actually go out there and do this. I can because I'm good at that kind of thing. Now, and the deaths have stopped recently. So I'm not saying they stopped, but it's funny enough, it seems to have calmed down recently. Fingers crossed, the serial killer stopped or something. But it's very, very likely there was a serial killer in Manchester. Now, the police commissioner there bollocked me out of it, which I was expecting to get, saying it was just causing families to be upset. I kept my mouth shut, and I was asked for comments because my attitude was, the ones who are upset are the family members of the ones who have been killed, and you're saying it's an open verdict when he screamed on the phone before being found dead in the canal, a healthy young guy. That's what's causing them to be upset. That's why fathers are out in the streets of Manchester handing out flyers to, help us to find out what happened to my son. And so I was happy about getting the thing out there, but it was also kind of a bit scary. I got a phone call a few weeks later from someone who was a talent agency person over here, and saying to me, really impressed with your work. You're very, very funny. Would you be interested in us signing you up for a possible TV show on mainstream? Looked up, this guy was legit. This talent agency was legit. They had done some shows on Channel 4 and Sky and things like that. So I was being offered. The offer was coming, right? And I said no. And and not out of principle, but to save my ass. You understand? It wasn't out of principle. It was to save my ass, because that was a lure in. And I like being a shitstormer on the outside. I don't want to be in there. I don't want to be in there. You'll like this story, Ian. About a month ago, I have another life where I'm interested in arts and heritage, and I'm involved in arts and heritage groups where I live up in Sligo. We had a general election around about a month and a half ago. I'm in the place, and I'm told that the opposition leader, Micheál Martin, big-time Bilderberger, you know about him. He was instrumental in the IMF bailout in Ireland. He was one of the Fianna Fáil government when it happened. Was coming to electioneering. And I was there quickly, and I said, okay. And someone said to me, Thomas, don't say anything. Just behave yourself. And I was like, no, I don't get involved in politics. I would never do that. This is about arts and helping artists in the community and stuff like that. And he comes in the door with the 2 special branch guys. And he walks in like this, and he goes, himself. He knew who I was. He knew who I was. Himself, like that. Comes over to me, shakes my hand, and you know something? He was an incredibly nice man. He was an incredibly sincere and nice man. And I had a very nice chat with him. I was talking to him about a heritage project. He was completely open to it. He knew everything. And we were talking about, these rural areas, we can develop them through tourism and arts and heritage more so than building factories that will close down or call centres. We had a great chat. And I looked him in the eyes. I looked him in the eyes because this is the first time I've ever held the hand of a Bilderberger, held a hand, and looked him in the eyes. and I saw a good man looking back at me. So it's very easy for us to dehumanize all of them. Remember, he may just have been one they brought with them. I'm sure there's plenty of good guys, good women at the top that these monsters, Thatcher and the other one up there, bring with them. And it's just they fall into the trap and they get into it. But he was a good guy. I have to say that. He didn't get elected. It doesn't matter anyway. But he didn't. His party, Fianna Fáil, didn't win the election. They didn't form a government. But that just goes to, that was the once in a lifetime chance I actually got that close to someone like that. And I have to say, it was not like what I expected. Now, so that's just in his case. There could be, I'm sure there's other ones like that are not like that, but he wasn't. So that made me very confused. That made me very, it made me very sort of like, well, here I am for the last 6 years saying we have a psychopathic system, which we do, that many of the people at the top are actually real psychopaths. They have the same mentality as serial killers, which they do, and yet among them are people who actually are not like that. It was very difficult for me to reconcile that. And this is an important point, because then I realized that I was the bad guy, because I had dehumanized a man I didn't actually know based on his job. And isn't that kind of fascism in a way? Isn't that kind of wrong? So the system is bad does not mean that everyone involved in it is bad. That's the kind of thing. And then after I got less depressed about it, I started to see hope in that. But I said, if someone or two, if a few good ones can sneak through or be brought through, that's potentially an open door. That's potentially an open door. And that got me thinking about, is that what do we have secret societies out there that are actually working on our behalf, on behalf of decency? Or do we have infiltrators who've actually gone into that world? I'm not saying he was, but gone into that world for that purpose. Highly educated people from wealthy families, who realize the same things we realize and are wrecking it from the inside. Who blows the whistle on all the cardinals having sex inside the Vatican? Someone very high up must have blown that. Is it one of ours? FIFA is another one. That they took them years to get into FIFA. FIFA was blown from someone on the inside, someone very high up, because that's the way they really get their hands on those accounts. So I would say to people, let's not lose hope about these things, because there is a real possibility that it's not, though it's bleak, although this is the bleakest of it, it's not that bleak. And because we're dealing with this magic thing, does anyone know who she is there? And that's Ian Brady. They were two child killers in Manchester. She was working at the top of the pop studio on Dickinson Road when he was the DJ. Well, you think that's good? His hair, before that famous mugshot came out, his hair was black. He modeled his image on her. That's how spooky these people are. Right? So he probably knew her. Brady's another interesting one. I spent years, I tried to get through to him, but he got my letter. And someone told me in Broadmoor, he got the letter and he just threw it away. He gets groupie letters from women wanting to have sex with him. Imagine that. Like disturbed, unwell people. Brady, when he came for his arraignment hearing, his parole hearing a few years ago, someone I've got fantastic contacts in journalism that deal with these kind of criminology cases because of the psychopath thing, told me that he was there, and Brady handles himself like an aristocrat. When you meet like a wealthy or a powerful person, they're different than us. They have this confidence we don't have. They don't give a shit, kind of like this. And he talks like that. And he's a guy who strangled little kids to death and buried them in the moors. He was also obsessed with the Nazis. He was obsessed with the Nazis, and he spoke fluent German in several different dialects of German, self-taught. He modeled himself on Joseph Mengele. He modeled himself on Myra Hindley. This guy here is a German. This guy here had a mother called the Duchess. Why was he protected by him? Because he was one of them. His mother, the Duchess, was probably the illegitimate daughter of some aristocrat. And what Max was saying about wiping out our genetic history, they're not doing it to themselves. They're nurturing and looking after their own genetic history while they're erasing ours. And that's why they don't like races like the Serbs. They don't like races like the Irish. They don't like the Sami. They don't like the Roma Gypsies, because they don't want indigenous Europeans. They don't want indigenous people anywhere. That's all tokenism. So when you hear stories about, I want to get in touch with an indigenous tribe, look yourself. You're an indigenous European. You're no less indigenous than someone in Peru or in Mexico or in the Arctic Circle or in Siberia. You had all the same things in your side of your body, the shaman, the druids. All that stuff is inside you as well. But you've been told for the last 200 years, and in the English, now I always say the first victims of the British Empire were the English. They were the first victims of the British Empire were the English. You ask an English person, what is your heritage? You go, oh, well, you start thinking, we won the World Cup in 1966. We got all these great bands in the 60s. Fair enough, right? Let's go back further. What's your folk culture? Morris dancing. Well, that's kind of like from the Middle Ages. Let's go back a bit further. The Harrying of the North by William the Conqueror. They drew a line in the English, and they said, they don't exist. And here's the new Anglo-Norman version of them. And that's when you started learning English the way it was. That's why you had your religion change, your folk change. And when it was finally finished off during the Industrial Revolution, when people were moved from the countryside into the big industrial cities in the north, you were ethnically cleansed over about 800 years, no less, about 600 years, by the same import from Europe, the Anglo-Normans, that eventually landed in Ireland. But fortunately, we had to preserve their culture through the Druids. How long do we have left? 20 minutes. So this is 25. This is not a negative presentation, okay? And I want to talk about the idea of a global mass awakening. And don't take my opinion as God in this thing, right? I could be wrong. My attitude is I don't care. And when I see what's out there in society, I don't want them. I don't mean that to be a snob, but I do mean it in one real way. Instead of calling them the elites, let's start calling ourselves here the elites. Let's start calling ourselves the elites. Because we are. Because with all the bullshit that we're subject to, X Factor, sports on TV, endless gaslighting by politicians, all this stuff, Peppa Pig, from the time you're a baby. There's children who are raised on Teletubby, and those kids are grown up perfectly healthy. The job that they have had trying to take us down has at every turn, we surprise them. We seem to surprise them. And you could say here, it's very, I'd say to everyone here, let's start a revolution. We're here. Let's take them down. And it seems wonderful in the moment that we're all here because we're all so similar. But on the street down the road, there was 10 times as many people watching Eurovision last night. You know what I'm saying? We don't need them. What we need to do is find the ones that are in there that we can take with us. But then we can only ask them. So now here's an example. People tell me all the time, I never tried to wake up people. Even where I live in my town, nobody knows what I do. I'm just some gobshite down the road. They have no idea I do things like this or written books or anything. No idea. And I'll give you a funny story. I went into a cafe when the Daily Mirror story came out in the town near where I live, and the page was open on one of the tables with my black and white photograph about that size, and it said, world expert in psychopathy Thomas Sheridan says there's a serial killer in Manchester, right? And I walked in, and I'm going, oh shit, here we go. And the girl standing beside us goes, Thomas, do you want a cappuccino? But that made me realize how many people don't pay attention to the mainstream media. They go, it's the first page and the last sports page. They really don't. It's kind of like they're on auto. The robot, as Colin Wilson calls it, has taken over, and they don't really pay attention. They only want to see what they want to see. Now, people say to me, well, when I go to, I've never tried to wake anyone up. My attitude is, I don't want you. And if you come to me and you're cool, well, great. But people say to me, I go to work and I'll mention, this chap mentioned it to me yesterday, and a lady this breakfast today mentioned to me, people, they look at you first like this. They go, the bank, and then the laugh comes out. And you can't get through to them, right? You can't get through to them. Well, when the day comes, when they have a chip in their brain and they're finally on, whatever it is, they're finally destroyed by the system, remember, you made them the offer to become one of the new elites. And they said no. They laughed at you. You asked them to be a volunteer, and they laughed at you. So your conscience is clear. And that's maybe how we have to start thinking about ourselves. Get out of this victim mindset that we're somehow, we're going to be all destroyed soon. No one's going to be. I mean, tomorrow night I'm going to be down to pub with my mates having a laugh and telling filthy jokes. I don't care. They can do whatever they want. But it's not going to. I'm aware, probably more than anyone in this room, how horrible this system is and how dark it gets. But I have a great life. I'm very, very happy. I have great fun. I'm always having the crack. And that's the way. They're not going to take the song from my heart. They're just not going to do it. And there's been the thing that really can hurt me the most is when I get a personal testimony of someone who was framed for paedophilia in a company or something like that, or in a job, or that hurts me. Because that's a real violation of someone, where a lie was told against them to try and destroy them somehow, personal level. But on the global level, I know there's nothing I can do about it. I also know how fragile it is. It's not as stable as they. You see, it's very. They want you thinking. They want you thinking that there's a bunch of Mr. Burns in a room, and they sit around and they talk about, well, we're going to gas them with chemtrails, or we're going to poison them with. It's not like that at all. It's not. A lot of it is this leftover from this Freemasonic system that's kind of become their modern political, diplomatic, commercial system. And a lot of it is haphazard. This is why they're always fixing their banking process. I mean, if these guys were the elites, how come everything falls apart so quickly? Falls apart. We don't have, I don't pay attention to whistleblowers or anything like that. I don't need them. When people say, why don't you, it's very easy for someone to say, why don't you become a whistleblower if you work in such and such a place? But that's very easy to say until you look at your kids. What's going to happen to them if I lose my job? You see, bravado is a funny thing. Bravado is great when it's someone else doing it. But when it's your balls to the wall, it's a different story. When your reality is there, then you realize the stakes. But that's also the weapons they use against you. That's also the weapons that they will use against you. So you have to be very careful. There's ways of blowing the whistle without becoming a hero. Let people like me take the bullets. I don't mean that literally. I mean, let the guys on the stage, let us do it. You don't have to walk around your neighborhood trying to wake people up. That's not your job. You're awake. Your now job is to have a happy, satisfying life and take care of yourself and the ones that are there. And then leave the rest of us to be a pain in the ass for them, the ones who are willing to step up. We'll do it for you. And we're glad to do it. I mean, I enjoy it because that's just how I am. I don't have a problem. I don't have any fear of them that way. Maybe when I was younger, I probably would have. Now I don't give a shit anymore. And that's also part of their weird occult thing as well. Because they have this weird thing, and this is true, that if you have fear, then you're okay for the slaughter. You understand? Where if you don't, they leave you alone. It's this weird kind of cultural thing that I've noticed in these books and also over the years, that they love when you're in fear. Because when you're in fear, you're acquiescing to their control. This again is black magic. They want you, and this is why I'm very dubious about some of these kind of I'm not going to name names, but these kind of sensational, alt media websites, and that go, dun, 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 end of the fucking world, blah, 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 and all this kind of thing. Incoming chemtrail, and all this crap, right? Buy your water filters and all that stuff. That puts you in a position of submission. You're already submissive. I'm afraid of what they're going to do to me. Therefore, what does a shark do when it senses fear? You talk to anyone who lives in India, a cobra will rarely attack a baby because the baby doesn't set off, it has no adrenaline, it doesn't know what a cobra is. And they have the same attitude, that when the cobra strikes, when your adrenaline goes up and the norepinephrine in your brain shoots at the back and they sense it in their infrared, and then they strike because they think you're about to strike them. And that's why they bite you. Because they have a hyperactive reptilian complex, lower part of their brainstem, norepinephrine shooting up from the lower brainstem, they think the same way. They love war. They absolutely love it. They absolutely love they love big business. They love bureaucracy. They love things going. They love going to their summits at Davos. It makes them feel fantastic. They're rolling the dice in the highest casinos in the world. And then when they get away with things like when they enable hangout, or they see things like these people. For instance, Margaret Thatcher, she actually got him arrested. She got him arrested because the coppers were moving in on him. And I'll tell you why. After she finally had enough of all the media hype about it, this is Margaret Thatcher's actual words. I'm sick of hearing about these wretched women in Yorkshire. Now let that sink in for a second. These wretched women in Yorkshire. She went up, bollocked the police commissioner out of South West Yorkshire out of it, and the next thing he's in jail. They were deliberately letting it go. They were deliberately, and the whole thing with the Moors murderers, the whole thing was your children are in danger. Moira Hindley, to my mother's generation, would have been like the ghost. And you look at this all over the world, they love serial killers for some reason. Son of Sam in New York became the basis of the police state and the cleaning up of New York City. And he was very involved in a group called the Process Church of the Final Judgment, who were heavily connected to the Manson family, who were heavily connected to the intelligence services. These are used as I'm not saying they send them out to kill. Sometimes they do. But most of the times when these things take off, they use them as social control measures. We need more cameras. You can't be on the streets at a certain time. But you ever notice it's rare that we have big-time serial killers anymore? Because you know how the curfew works now? They have a passive curfew. A passive curfew. X Factor. Eurovision. Champions League football. Remember when football used to be on a Saturday and a Wednesday? And now it's on every night of the week? That's a passive curfew. Your camp guards are Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell is the commandant. He looks after them and makes sure they do as they're told while they're watching X Factor. EastEnders. And people are glued to it. And the one that really gets me is the mobile device. You see, everyone's like, right? There's a thing in ritual magic called scrying. And you take an obsidian mirror. And it's highly polished obsidian mirror. And you look at the mirror, and it has a light on either side. And when you're scrying, you see demons. And there's a belief that demons live in the terminator between the back of the mirror and your perception. What color are most mobile devices today? Black. They have a light either on the top and the bottom, or on the left or the right. People are scrying. And they're scrying the demons of mass media and mind control. That's what they're doing. They're scrying demons. The demons are football, TV news, and all the bollocks that we have they're all into. Advertising. That's who the magicians, that's who the lords of perception are. The advertisers, the marketers, the hype merchants. The fellow who called me up and says, we'd like to give you a job in England. Because I knew I was going to be set up big time for some kind. They were going to, at one point, they were going to do something to steal my ideas, give it to someone else, or they were going to actually do something to hurt me. You know, and that's the same thing. Like you look at pop music, it's the same thing today. How would you like to be famous for a little bit, have a song on the charts, and then you're back in the dole a few weeks later? Once in a blue moon. Now, I'm going to finish up a little bit here. I'm sure I'm on time now. Where is hope? I'm glad Max brought the thing about the genetic sperm heritage inside it, because it's important. Where is hope? You are an enormous, no matter how uneducated, if you're a PhD, no matter where you come from, what social status, you are the living repository of the sum total of all your ancestors, completely, right? In 1699, there was a farm in County Meath in Ireland where a landlord, a landed gentry, was removing some stones from a mound to build the construction of a road, 1699. As he was removing the stones, he found this large stone that had all these decorated spirals on it. The name of the farm was the New Grange. His name was William Campbell, and eventually underneath it, he found this. This is the New Grange Neolithic Observatory. It's not a tomb. No bodies have ever been found in these. He opened it up. This is eventually what it looked like, but it's been cleaned up since then. But that's what was in there. On every winter solstice, when the sun rises, it goes down this chamber here, this passage through a little gap in the top, and illuminates 3 spirals carved into the wall at the back of the central chamber. It's probably 4,000 or 5,000. We don't really know. Let's just say 4,000 years old for. And to this day, that still works. So the people that built a time machine to tell the future we existed. Now, in 1699, when Campbell opened this up, he was convinced it was Danish. He thought it was built by the Vikings, because there were similar mounds in Scandinavia. And so he brought over a Welsh antiquarian called Lund. And the Welsh antiquarian came over, and he looked at it, and he said, I don't know what it is. It's probably something from heathen times. I'll talk to some of the locals. And he met a farmer called Cormac O'Neill. And he went up to Cormac O'Neill, and he said to him, what do you know about this place here, this heathen mound, this barbarous mound, he called it. And he goes, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's not a tomb. It's the repository of the god Angus Owen, who was born as an adulterous affair between the Dagda god and the Boan River goddess in 1699. And your man was shocked, Lund. And how do you know this? My mother told me. My sister knows it. My aunt knows it. And he wrote this down, Lund wrote this down, and then a cryptic thing he writes, and then a mention of a barbarous operation that took place in heathen times involving the sun. That event had not happened for thousands of years. Yet Cormac O'Neill, through the oral tradition of storytelling and passing information on, had kept alive these stories of ancestors that went back thousands of years, including the winter solstice rising through the slot in the top. Just let that sink in for a second. Thousands and thousands of years. 200 years later, in the late 18th Victorian era, the 1800s, the Gaelic League in Ireland started to open up all these ancient manuscripts written by the Druids I told you about before St. Patrick and around St. Patrick came along, and started to find out that this thing that this Cormac O'Neill had mentioned 200 years earlier, the Truaid Danann, we have their genealogy. This is the Dagda god. This is the Boan River goddess. Everything that the guy had said had come out to be true. He was not making up fairy tales. He was talking about real history and real mythology that he kept in the community and the family for thousands of years. It had survived the arrival of Christianity, the Vikings, the arrival of the Normans, the arrival of the English. He kept it all, the sectarian wars. But it remained, with all the horrors that happened in Ireland, that story remained in this Cormac O'Neill's mind. And he told this guy Lund. And this place here was ridiculed for years and years, saying the part about the sun isn't true. And academics in National University in Ireland, archaeologists, said it's not true. Until one of them actually slept in the chamber that morning, and the sun rose up over the Boyne River and went through the hole and lit the spirals on the wall from 5,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. The ancestors had not only come back to life, and that thing is like one of Ireland's biggest tourist attractions today, and all around it, entire things have been found, but it was kept in the soul of this guy called Cormac O'Neill. And what does that tell you? That's how much you all carry inside you. And so, be like him. Don't let them take the song from your heart. Don't become evangelical going around kicking people, waking up. There's no need to feel upset at work anymore when people lie at you. Keep it in there, and it'll never go away. Thanks very much.